The cruelest thing about humiliation isn't that everyone sees it. It's that no one looks away. I never imagined those words would become the soundtrack of the worst night of my life. The marble floor beneath my knees felt colder than winter, polished so perfectly that I could see my own frightened reflection staring back at me beneath the dazzling crystal chandeliers of the Ashcroft Grand Hotel. Hundreds of perfectly dressed guests surrounded me, their expensive suits and glittering gowns blending into a blur of whispered conversations and glowing phone screens. Some looked uncomfortable. Most simply watched. None of them stepped forward. My name is Amelia Brooks, and 26 years of honest living had somehow led me to this moment. 12 hours earlier, I had been arranging flowers in the lobby, worrying about my younger brother Ethan's hospital bills and whether my second paycheck this month would be enough to keep his treatments on schedule. I wasn't supposed to attend the Blackstone Foundation Gala. I was only filling in for another employee who had called in sick. It should have been an ordinary shift. Instead, it became the night that divided my life into before and after. "Stay on your knees," a sharp female voice ordered from somewhere above me. "Maybe then you'll remember not to steal from people who actually belong here." A ripple of quiet laughter spread across the ballroom. I closed my eyes for 1 second, fighting the sting gathering behind them. I knew I hadn't taken the missing diamond bracelet. I knew security hadn't found a single piece of evidence against me. But facts suddenly meant very little when the daughter of one of the city's wealthiest donors insisted I was guilty. Reputation outweighed truth in rooms like this. I could have stood up. Every part of me wanted to. But then I remembered Ethan lying in his hospital bed that morning, smiling through exhaustion while pretending not to notice the overdue medical notices stacked beside his backpack. If causing a scene tonight meant losing this job, I wasn't risking it. Not for my pride. Not when my little brother needed me more than I needed dignity. My hands trembled against the smooth marble as another camera flash lit the room. Somewhere behind the crowd, a violin quartet continued playing as though nothing unusual was happening. The music sounded beautiful, almost mocking, floating through the air while my heartbeat pounded louder than every note. A security manager shifted nervously near the entrance but didn't interfere. The hotel's general manager refused to meet my eyes. Everyone seemed to understand the same invisible rule. Powerful families protected their own. Then something changed. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't an announcement. It was silence. Conversations faded one by one until even the musicians slowly stopped playing. I noticed people turning toward the ballroom entrance instead of looking at me. Expressions changed from curiosity to uncertainty, then to something that looked dangerously close to fear. I lifted my head just enough to see polished black shoes crossing the marble floor with calm, measured steps. No one introduced him. No one needed to. The crowd moved aside long before he reached them, creating a path without being asked. I didn't know his name yet, but the moment he entered the room, everyone else's power seemed to disappear. The man stopped about 10 feet away from me, yet somehow the distance felt much shorter. I could not explain why every person in the ballroom seemed to forget how to breathe at the exact same moment. Even without knowing his name, I understood one thing immediately. Power did not always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it arrived in complete silence. His tailored black suit looked impossibly simple compared to the extravagant tuxedos surrounding him, but every detail fit with effortless precision. Dark hair, calm gray eyes, and an expression that revealed almost nothing. He was not smiling. He was not angry. He simply observed the room as though he already knew how the evening would end. I lowered my eyes again, hoping he would continue walking past me. Men with influence rarely noticed women like me unless something had gone terribly wrong. Tonight, everything had. The woman accusing me crossed her arms confidently. "This does not concern you," she said with a polished smile that barely concealed her irritation. "Hotel security is handling an employee who forgot her place." The stranger did not answer immediately. Instead, his gaze moved from the diamond bracelet resting on the velvet display box to my trembling hands, then to the faint hospital visitor bracelet still hidden beneath the sleeve of my uniform. I had forgotten to remove it after visiting Ethan before work. His eyes lingered there for only a second before returning to my face. Somehow, that brief glance made me feel more seen than everyone else in the room combined. The hotel manager hurried forward, forcing an uneasy laugh. "Good evening, Mr. Moretti." We sincerely apologize that you had to witness this unpleasant misunderstanding. We will resolve everything shortly. Moretti. The name traveled through the crowd in whispers that spread faster than any announcement. I watched several guests quietly step backward. Others lowered their voices. Even the donors who had been speaking with absolute confidence only moments earlier suddenly looked uncertain. I had lived in New York my entire life, yet I had never heard his name before. Whatever it meant to them, it clearly carried weight. The woman accusing me smiled again, although this time it looked forced. Please do not let this delay your evening. She simply needs to admit what she did. I wanted to speak. I wanted to tell him that I had never touched the bracelet, that I had spent the entire evening arranging flowers, greeting guests, and trying to earn enough overtime to cover another week of Ethan's medication. But my throat refused to cooperate. Fear had a way of stealing words before anyone else could. Mr. Moretti slowly looked around the ballroom instead of answering her. His eyes settled on dozens of guests holding up their phones. One by one, they lowered them without being asked. It was the strangest thing I had ever witnessed. No threats, no raised voice, just quiet authority. Somewhere behind me, I heard someone whisper, "Turn the cameras off." Another guest quickly slipped a phone into a jacket pocket. The room that had eagerly watched my humiliation only moments earlier suddenly seemed desperate to disappear. I remained on my knees, confused by the invisible shift unfolding around me. Whatever had changed had nothing to do with me. Or at least that was what I believed until Mr. Moretti finally looked directly into my eyes. There was no pity in his expression. No judgment either. Only calm certainty, as though he had already made a decision that no one else in the ballroom was going to challenge. His eyes never left mine, and for the first time that evening, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt curiosity, not because I believed he would save me, but because he was the only person in the ballroom who seemed interested in finding the truth instead of protecting a reputation. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Then the woman who had accused me cleared her throat and stepped forward with practiced confidence. "Mr. Moretti, this employee was caught near the jewelry display moments before my grandmother's bracelet disappeared. Several people saw her standing there. She has refused to cooperate." Her voice was polished, calm, almost convincing. If I had not been living through the nightmare myself, I might have believed her. I opened my mouth to explain that I had only been replacing wilted flowers beside the display, exactly as my supervisor instructed, but another voice interrupted before I could speak. "She should apologize," one of the donors declared. "The hotel cannot allow this kind of behavior." Another guest nodded. "Everyone has responsibilities. Actions have consequences." Their words floated through the ballroom like carefully rehearsed lines. No one asked whether the accusation was true. They only discussed how quickly the situation could disappear. I lowered my eyes again. Maybe this was how truth vanished. Not through lies alone, but through the convenience of silence. I thought about Ethan waiting for my call after his evening treatment. Every night I promised him that tomorrow would be better. Every night he believed me without hesitation. I wondered how I would explain losing my job because someone wealthier needed a person to blame. My chest tightened, but I refused to cry. They had already taken enough from me tonight. I would not give them my dignity as well. The hotel manager forced another nervous smile toward Mr. Moretti. "We appreciate your patience. We have already contacted our legal department. This unfortunate matter will be concluded within minutes." Mr. Moretti finally spoke, his voice quiet enough that everyone instinctively leaned closer to hear. Interesting. That single word carried no anger, yet the manager's smile disappeared immediately. Mr. Moretti slowly walked toward the jewelry display instead of toward me. He examined the velvet stand where the missing bracelet had supposedly rested. His attention shifted to the security cameras mounted above the ballroom entrance, then to the elegant floral arrangement beside the display. The same arrangement I had spent nearly an hour creating that afternoon. He noticed details no one else seemed to consider. His fingertips brushed a single white rose whose petals had begun to curl under the warmth of the ballroom lights. "Who arranged these flowers?" he asked. For a moment no one answered. The question sounded almost absurd compared to the accusations filling the room. Finally, my supervisor raised a trembling hand. "Amelia did, sir." Mr. Moretti gave the smallest nod before looking back at me. "How long?" he asked. I blinked in confusion. "How long what?" I whispered. "How long were you working beside this display?" His tone remained calm, almost conversational, yet every person in the ballroom waited for my answer as though it mattered more than anything else that had been said. I searched my memory through the haze of exhaustion. About 45 minutes, I answered honestly. His expression did not change, but I noticed the faintest trace of understanding settle behind his eyes. Whatever he had just realized, it was something no one else in that ballroom had even thought to question. The ballroom remained perfectly still after I answered, as though the entire evening had begun revolving around a question no one else considered worth asking. 45 minutes. I had been standing beside that display arranging fresh white roses, trimming stems, replacing water, and greeting guests. If I had intended to steal an expensive bracelet, I thought bitterly, why would I have stayed there long enough for everyone to remember seeing me? Mr. Moretti slowly turned toward the hotel manager. Were the security cameras recording? He asked. The manager hesitated for a heartbeat before answering. Yes, sir. They record continuously. Good. That single word landed with surprising weight. I noticed several executives exchange uneasy glances. The woman accusing me folded her arms more tightly, her polished smile beginning to fade around the edges. The cameras only prove she was nearby, she insisted. Everyone already knows that. Mr. Moretti looked at her without changing his expression. Nearby and guilty are not the same thing. No one answered. The silence that followed felt different from before. Earlier it had belonged to fear. Now it belonged to uncertainty. He took another slow step across the marble floor until he stood only a few feet away from me. For the first time all evening, someone extended a hand instead of pointing a finger. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. Stand. Now. The words were simple. Only two. Yet they seemed to erase everything that had happened during the past 20 minutes. I stared at his outstretched hand, uncertain whether I had heard him correctly. No one had told me to stand. They had only told me to apologize, to explain myself, to remain where I was until someone decided my future. My knees ached against the cold marble, but the greater pain had settled somewhere much deeper. Slowly, I accepted his hand. He did not pull me upward. He simply offered enough support for me to rise on my own. Somehow that mattered. My legs trembled slightly as I stood, smoothing the wrinkles from my hotel uniform with embarrassed hands. I expected someone to object immediately. Instead, no one spoke. The guests who had eagerly watched me only moments earlier quietly lowered their eyes. Even the woman accusing me seemed uncertain whether to continue. Mr. Moretti turned toward the ballroom without releasing the calm authority in his voice. No employee should be treated as guilty before the facts are examined. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. Yet every person listened. The hotel manager quickly nodded. Of course, sir. Lock the exits, Mr. Moretti continued. No guest leaves until the security footage is reviewed. A wave of surprise spread across the room. Some people looked offended. Others appeared nervous. One businessman glanced toward the entrance before realizing two members of the hotel security team had already moved into position without argument. They were not obeying because they feared shouting. They were obeying because they trusted the quiet certainty of the man giving instructions. I looked around in disbelief. Just minutes ago, I had been completely alone. Now the room itself had changed direction. I still did not know why Mr. Moretti had chosen to involve himself in the life of an ordinary hotel employee. Perhaps he simply believed fairness mattered. Perhaps he saw something everyone else had ignored. Or perhaps there was another reason hidden beneath that unreadable expression. As the ballroom doors closed with a soft click, I realized the evening was no longer about proving my innocence. Someone else was about to discover that the truth had been waiting in plain sight all along. The quiet click of the ballroom doors echoed far louder than it should have. No one tried to leave after that. The guests who had spent the evening speaking with effortless confidence suddenly became unusually interested in their champagne glasses, their cuff links, or the polished marble beneath their shoes. It was astonishing how quickly certainty disappeared when accountability entered the room. I stood near the floral display, rubbing my sore hands together while trying to steady my breathing. Mr. Moretti had already stepped toward the hotel's security director, speaking in a calm voice too low for me to hear. There were no dramatic gestures, no visible anger. Yet within seconds, employees who had ignored me all evening began moving with remarkable purpose. A technician hurried toward the security office. Another employee quietly closed the velvet ropes around the display. Even the violin quartet remained silent, their instruments resting peacefully in their laps, as if the music itself understood it was time to wait for the truth. The woman who had accused me finally broke the silence. "This is becoming completely unnecessary," she said, forcing another composed smile. "Surely everyone here understands that accidents happen. We should not inconvenience distinguished guests over something so small." Mr. Moretti looked at her with the same unreadable expression. "If it is small, then confirming the facts should not concern anyone." She laughed softly, but the sound carried no confidence this time. "You are suggesting that I might be mistaken?" "I am suggesting nothing," he replied. "I prefer evidence." Those two words settled over the ballroom like a curtain. Evidence. Not assumptions. Not status. Not influence. I watched several guests exchange uneasy glances. Earlier they had eagerly agreed with every accusation made against me. Now they carefully avoided taking anyone's side at all. It was as though the room had suddenly remembered that truth could exist independently of wealth. My supervisor cautiously approached me, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. "Amelia, are you all right?" I looked at him with surprise. He had not asked me that question once during the entire ordeal. I managed a small nod. "I think so." He lowered his eyes with visible regret. I should have spoken sooner. I understood what he really meant. Fear had kept him silent. In another situation, perhaps I would have judged him. Tonight, I simply felt tired. Fear had controlled almost everyone in the ballroom until someone refused to surrender to it. A hotel employee returned moments later and quietly informed the manager that the complete surveillance recordings had been retrieved. The manager swallowed nervously before looking toward Mr. Moretti. "The footage is ready." Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. Every conversation stopped on its own. Even the woman who had accused me stood perfectly still, although I noticed the confident smile had disappeared completely. Mr. Moretti slowly turned toward the large presentation screen that had displayed the Foundation's charity projects earlier that evening. "Play it from 1 hour before the bracelet was reported missing," he said. The technician hesitated. "The entire hour, sir?" "Every minute." The ballroom lights dimmed as the projector awakened with a quiet hum. My heartbeat matched its rhythm. I did not know what those recordings would reveal. I only knew I had nothing to hide. For the first time since the nightmare began, hope quietly replaced fear. Whatever appeared on that screen during the next few minutes would not simply determine whether I kept my job. It would reveal who everyone in that ballroom had chosen to believe before they ever bothered searching for the truth. The projector hummed softly as the ballroom lights faded, leaving every face illuminated by the pale glow of the enormous screen. I could hear my own heartbeat more clearly than the machine behind us. No one reached for a drink. No one whispered anymore. The room that had judged me so confidently only minutes earlier now waited for something far more uncomfortable than another accusation. It was waiting for proof. The recording began with an ordinary evening. Guests drifted through the ballroom laughing. Servers carried silver trays from table to table, and I appeared on the screen arranging white roses beside the jewelry display exactly as I remembered. I watched myself trim stems, straighten ribbons, and greet arriving donors with a nervous smile. Time passed minute by minute. I never touched the velvet box. I never even looked inside it. Mr. Moretti said nothing. He simply watched every second without blinking. The woman who had accused me folded her arms again, although this time the gesture looked less like confidence and more like self-comfort. "Keep watching," Mr. Moretti said quietly. The technician obeyed. The footage continued. I carried an empty watering pitcher away from the display before returning several minutes later with fresh flowers from the service hallway. A waiter crossed behind me. A photographer stopped to capture pictures of the decorations. Guests admired the floral arrangements before walking toward the ballroom entrance. Everything unfolded exactly as a normal evening should. Then Mr. Moretti lifted one finger. Pause. The image froze. He stepped closer to the screen. Zoom in. The technician enlarged the corner of the recording near the jewelry display. Several people leaned forward in their chairs. I did the same. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed a woman in an elegant silver gown standing near the display while everyone else's attention remained fixed on the arriving guests. She appeared for only a few seconds before disappearing behind a column. My stomach tightened. It was the same woman who had accused me. "Continue," Mr. Moretti instructed. The recording resumed. Seconds later, the woman in silver glanced over both shoulders before lifting the bracelet from its display. Instead of placing it into a purse or pocket, she quietly slipped it beneath a folded silk scarf resting on a nearby chair. Then she walked calmly across the ballroom and rejoined another group of guests, smiling as though nothing had happened. Less than 2 minutes later, she loudly announced that the bracelet had disappeared. A wave of stunned silence swept across the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Every accusation directed toward me suddenly collapsed beneath the weight of undeniable truth. The hotel manager covered his mouth in disbelief. My supervisor slowly lowered his head, unable to meet my eyes. Several guests who had eagerly agreed with the accusation now stared at the floor, their expressions filled with embarrassment. I felt my knees weaken, not from fear this time, but from overwhelming relief. I had spent the last hour wondering whether my life had already been destroyed. Instead, the truth had quietly defended itself. The woman in silver stared at the frozen image on the screen, her face completely drained of color. She opened her mouth as though searching for an explanation, but none came. Mr. Moretti remained perfectly calm. He did not celebrate. He did not humiliate her the way I had been humiliated. He simply looked around the ballroom and asked one question that no one could answer. How many of you decided she was guilty before you were willing to look at the facts? No one answered Mr. Moretti's question. They could not. The truth was standing in the middle of the ballroom, brighter than the crystal chandeliers above us, and it exposed far more than a missing bracelet. It revealed how quickly people surrendered their judgment when status spoke louder than facts. I looked around the room and recognized faces that had refused to meet my eyes while I knelt only minutes earlier. Now those same people seemed unable to look at me at all. The silence carried an entirely different weight. It was no longer mine to endure. The hotel manager slowly walked toward me, his shoulders noticeably lower than before. "Miss Brooks," he said carefully, "on behalf of the Ashcroft Grand Hotel, I owe you a sincere apology." His voice echoed through the ballroom because no one else dared interrupt. "You were treated unfairly, and we failed to protect both your dignity and your professionalism." I listened without saying a word. Earlier that evening, I would have given anything to hear those words. Now they felt strangely small compared to everything that had already happened. An apology could not erase the memory of kneeling on a cold marble floor while strangers decided who I was without knowing anything about me. The woman in the silver gown finally stepped forward. Her confidence had disappeared completely. I made a mistake," she said quietly. "I was trying to prove a point, and everything went too far." Mr. Moretti turned toward her. "A mistake is forgetting where you placed your keys," he replied calmly. "Choosing another person to carry the blame is a decision." His voice never rose, yet every word landed with unmistakable clarity. She lowered her eyes immediately. For the first time that evening, someone else understood what it felt like to stand beneath the weight of everyone's attention. The difference was that no one mocked her. No one demanded humiliation in return. The lesson spoke loudly enough on its own. One of the foundation donors slowly approached me with an embarrassed expression. "Miss Brooks, I should not have assumed." Before he could finish, another guest stepped beside him, then another. Within moments, several people who had watched silently during my humiliation were offering apologies of their own. Some sounded genuine. Others simply looked relieved that the truth had surfaced before the evening became an even greater scandal. I thanked them politely, but something inside me had changed. Their approval no longer felt necessary. I had spent too much of my life believing that acceptance from powerful people determined my worth. Tonight taught me otherwise. My worth had never disappeared. Their judgment had simply failed to recognize it. Mr. Moretti watched the quiet exchange without seeking attention for himself. He had not asked for gratitude. He had not reminded anyone that he had uncovered the truth. He simply ensured that fairness was restored before taking a single step backward. That simple choice somehow impressed me more than everything else he had done. As guests slowly returned their phones to their pockets and conversations cautiously resumed, the ballroom no longer felt like the same room where my nightmare had begun. The marble floor had not changed. The chandeliers still sparkled overhead. Yet everything looked different because I was no longer seeing the room through fear. Then my phone vibrated softly inside the pocket of my uniform. I glanced at the screen and saw Ethan's name. My heart immediately skipped a beat. He never called during his evening treatment unless something unexpected had happened. My hands trembled as I answered the call and stepped a few feet away from the crowd. "Ethan?" I asked, trying to hide the emotion still caught in my throat. Instead of my brother's voice, a warm nurse answered. "Miss Brooks, do not worry. Ethan is all right. He insisted on calling because someone stopped by earlier this evening and took care of the balance on his treatment account." I frowned, certain I had misunderstood. "What balance?" "The remaining balance," she repeated gently. "Every outstanding bill has been paid in full, including the next phase of his care. We thought it was a family member, but the gentleman asked us not to share his name." My heart seemed to forget how to beat. "Did he leave any message?" There was a brief pause. "Only one. He said your brother should focus on getting well, because some burdens are never meant to belong to a child." The call ended a few moments later, but I remained standing perfectly still, staring at the dark screen of my phone. I had spent months calculating every dollar, working extra shifts, skipping meals, and pretending everything would somehow work out. Then, in a single evening, a stranger had quietly removed the weight I had carried for so long without asking for recognition. I slowly turned back toward the ballroom. Guests had begun leaving in respectful silence after the hotel manager formally cleared my name. Employees were carefully returning the room to normal, replacing decorations and collecting empty glasses as though they hoped ordinary routines could erase the memory of what had happened. Across the ballroom, Mr. Moretti stood near one of the tall windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. He was preparing to leave without accepting thanks, applause, or attention. I knew I would regret it forever if I let him walk away without speaking. I crossed the marble floor until I stopped beside him. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The city lights reflected across the glass, turning the skyline into thousands of quiet stars. "Was it you?" I finally asked. He looked out toward the streets below instead of answering immediately. "Was what me?" "The hospital." My voice was barely above a whisper. "Ethan's treatment." A faint smile almost appeared before disappearing again. "Your brother deserves the opportunity to recover," he said simply. "That is all that matters." "Why?" I asked. "You did not know me." He turned toward me for the first time since the ballroom had emptied. His calm gray eyes carried the same quiet certainty they had from the moment he entered the room. "You are mistaken," he replied. "Knowing a person's character does not always require knowing their history." I searched for words, but none came. Every reason I had imagined seemed too small to explain the kindness standing in front of me. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a neatly folded business card. There was no elaborate design, only his name and a single phone number. He placed it gently into my hand. "If anyone ever asks you to doubt your own worth again," he said, "call before you apologize." With that, he turned toward the ballroom doors. I watched him walk away without looking back, carrying himself with the same quiet confidence that had transformed an entire room without raising his voice. I closed my fingers around the card, unaware that the greatest surprise of the night had not yet revealed itself. The limousine disappeared into the Manhattan traffic, leaving me alone beneath the glowing lights of the hotel entrance with nothing but a simple business card resting in my hand. I stared at Vincent Moretti's name for a long moment before slipping it carefully into my wallet, right beside the worn photograph of Ethan and me from years ago. Something about that placement felt strangely natural, although I could not explain why. Life did not suddenly become perfect after that night. I still woke before sunrise. I still worked long shifts. Ethan still faced months of recovery. But one thing had changed forever. I no longer believed that kindness belonged only to ordinary people or that power always existed to protect itself. Sometimes real strength appeared quietly, expecting nothing in return. 3 weeks later, Ethan was finally strong enough to leave the hospital. As we walked toward the parking lot, he reached into his backpack and handed me a small white envelope. "A man left this for you," he said with a smile. "He said I should wait until I was discharged before giving it to you." There was no signature on the outside, only my name, written in careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It contained one sentence: "Never apologize for surviving a moment that was never your fault to carry." Tucked behind the note was a copy of an old newspaper clipping dated almost 20 years earlier. My eyes widened as I studied the faded photograph. It showed the lobby of a neighborhood community center after a charity event. In the background stood a little girl, no older than 6, proudly holding a bouquet of white roses almost too large for her tiny hands. Beside her, barely visible near the edge of the picture, stood a quiet teenage volunteer helping elderly guests down the front steps. I looked closer. The little girl was me. The teenage volunteer was unmistakably Vincent Moretti, years before anyone spoke his name with quiet respect. Suddenly, I remembered a forgotten moment from childhood. I had tripped while carrying flowers, scattering them across the sidewalk. Before I could cry, an older boy had knelt beside me, helped gather every rose, and smiled before saying, "Flowers still bloom after they fall." I had forgotten his face. I had never forgotten those words. Tears blurred my vision as everything finally made sense. That night at the hotel had not been the beginning of our story. It had simply been the moment our paths crossed again after years of moving in different directions. I folded the newspaper clipping with careful hands and slipped it beside his business card. Ethan looked at me curiously. "Are you smiling?" he asked. I laughed softly. I think I finally remembered something important. As we walked toward the afternoon sunlight, I realized that the greatest gift Vincent had given me was never the cleared hospital bills or the restored reputation. He had returned something far more valuable. He had reminded me that dignity is never granted by powerful people and never taken away by cruel ones. It lives quietly inside us, waiting for the day we choose to stand again. And sometimes the strongest person in the room is not the one who commands attention, but the one who sees another human being when everyone else only sees a story they have already decided to believe.